Wow, you've had your coffee today.
I've already had 3, Seth.
David turned to me and said, we make it with bacon because we think it tastes good with bacon. And there's a vegetarian restaurant 3 doors down. I think you should go there. That was the day that David Chang became David Chang and that Momofuku became Momofuku. Starbucks logo is terrible. It's just terrible. It would get you kicked out of art school. That doesn't mean they don't have a good brand. It means they have a bad logo. My mission is to help people make their circle of us bigger and their circle of now longer. And I believe that as boomers like me die off and a new generation shows up, that is not only an amazing strategy available to people, but it's morally imperative.
Seth, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, mate. I'm so grateful. I spent the last couple of weekends reading excerpts from your book, This is Strategy, and it just absolutely blew my mind. And I'm so excited for this to be kind of blossomed into the world. What I'd love to start with, and there was one part in the book that really kind of tickled my curiosity, I should say, and it's the 4 threads woven together. And in that you say time because strategy plays out over time the way a garden grows. Games because there are multiple players and different possible outcomes. Trees compete for light and only grows to be the tallest, but all of them are part of the forest. This is just insane. I love this. Empathy because people don't see what you see or even want what you want. Plant your seeds in places where the conditions are right. And finally, systems, because whenever we work together, a system is created, and that system often lasts far longer than we expect. The swamp isn't the same as the plains, but each is a complex web of interactions. And what I'd like to start with is I think last time I kind of learned everything exclusively in analogy. And that really got me thinking that kind of building brands is very analogous to kind of growing trees. Trees fight for attention of water and light. Brands fight for attention of consumers. If tree saplings grow too quickly and get too much light, the bark is weak and they break. Brands like trees have to weather depressing winters and bullish kind of hot summers. I think a niche market is like finding a little pool of light that the tree can just blossom upwards and grow quicker. And then actually, I suppose this is a little bit of a weird one, but if you were to look at a tree and flip it upside down, it looks a bit like a organizational chart, but that may be pushing it a little bit too far. But before we get into strategy, I would love to understand what is the difference between marketing, brand, storytelling, and strategy. And I think if we use the tree as the kind of the analogy to begin with, and feel free to kind of blow this over, but let's say the seed is kind of the founder's vision. The strategy or the brand values are the roots. The product is the trunk. The marketing, the storytelling are the branches. And I suppose, as I said, light, water, consumers' attention, consumers' money. And then that little moment of magic, almost, I don't know, kind of that Starbucks writing on the cup, is that moment when the tree and the flowers on the tree kind of flourish and blossom. But let's say, feel free to tear that down. But what is the difference between, strategy, brand, marketing, storytelling, and where would they sit on that tree?
Wow, you've had your coffee today already.
I've already had 3, Seth.
First, it's great to be here. I learned so much when I talk to you. Analogies are how we learn, but if the analogy gets too labored, we get caught. We get stuck on the tree, right? I want to start by talking about customers, because I am fascinated by food brands. I'm fascinated by bespoke things, by founder-driven organizations. And where so many of them get into trouble is they don't choose their customers. And the thing about trees is if all their seeds actually germinated and grew, there would be nothing but forest all the time. Almost all seeds fail. The only ones that grow are the ones that land in the right soil, in the right spot. And too often, because the entrepreneur in the food industry begins with, well, everyone eats, and then they move on to, and what I make is delicious. They follow that with, so everyone should want what I make. And so the tree I want to talk about, the smallest tree you can imagine, pretty much tree-wise, is a Brussels sprout. Now, Brussels sprouts, they grow on these stalk things, and they were one of the first items on David Chang's menu at Momofuku. We used to go to Momofuku, my two kids, my wife and I, on Saturdays. It's a 25-minute, half an hour drive for me in the electric car down to Manhattan. We would get there when they opened, before they were famous, before the reviews, and we would sit at the counter. And I'm pretty sure it was David at the griddle. I'm not confident, but I'm pretty sure it was. And I haven't eaten meat in 35 years. And I would say, I would like the Brussels sprouts, please. Leave off the bacon. Now, this is a good offer because now he doesn't have to pay for the bacon and I can eat the item and not leave anything over. And the first 3 times I ordered it, they made it for me the way I wanted. And it was delicious. The 4th time we went, David turned to me and said, you know, we make it with bacon because we think it tastes good with bacon. And there's a vegetarian restaurant 3 doors down that someone else owns. I think you should go there. And that was the day that David Chang became David Chang and that Momofuku became Momofuku. Pick your customers, pick your future. That's a strategy choice. That is how you actually build a brand. You stand for something for someone. You are not trying to make everything for everyone. And if you have principles and you are willing to politely and respectfully send someone somewhere else, now you stand for something. If you're not willing to do that, then you don't have a brand. You're just a commodity provider.
So strategy is more like actually selecting which field to plant your tree in, and that's saying no, so that's saying no to all those fields over there. Not those fields will do Brussels sprouts with bacon. This field specifically is where we're going to plant this tree. Interesting. And then on the difference between, and I appreciate we can get hung up on analogies. What is the difference, just to kind of set the scene on this, between brand marketing strategy and storytelling? Because, you know, I speak to so many different food and drink founders. Some lead with storytelling. It's all about the storytelling. Another friend of mine, Alex Smith, it's all about the strategy. The storytelling's a thing on top. Like, how are they different? I think first, and then we can kind of really jump into the roots and weeds of strategy.
Let's get rid of brand first. There are 2 ways to think about brand. The wrong way is to say it's your logo. That we're going through a rebranding exercise. This is nonsense. You're going through a relogoing exercise. Have fun, but it doesn't matter, right? Starbucks logo is terrible. It's just terrible. It would get you kicked out of art school. That doesn't mean they don't have a good brand. It means they have a bad logo, right? Brand is simply the story people tell themselves about the promise you are making. So the simple example that I've used before is this. Hyatt has a logo. Nike has a brand. The way I know this is if Hyatt announced they were coming out with a new line of running shoes, no one would have any idea what it was like. But if Nike said they're opening a hotel, we know exactly what it would be like. A brand is the promise and expectation you have that allows you to command loyalty and a premium price. If you don't have those things, you don't have a brand. You have a logo. So that's brand. Storytelling is not once upon a time. It doesn't have to be words. If you go to an open house, they have those in the UK when they're selling a house, I think, and you're walking around and you smell apple pie baking, that is a story. It is a story that reminds you of your mom. It is a story of all these complicated emotions that have nothing to do with a roof, but everything to do with buying a house. And strategy and story have to go together. So Patagonia. Patagonia is one of the most valuable brands in its category. Patagonia sells clothing to people who already own clothes. It sells clothing to people who could buy something much cheaper from someone else. Their strategy is to stand for something for a certain group of dirtbag outdoor people or people who want to feel like they're aligned with those folks. And the story, they live it in every way. Their store is made out of bricks. They will go out of their way to rent a store made out of bricks because that's part of their story. What they do with their profits, how they're owned, what they make, what they don't make. These are parts of their story. So go ahead, please.
Is there an example of a food? Because firstly, I can almost imagine if Starbucks created a trainer or sneaker tomorrow. In my head, I kind of know exactly what it looked like. But is there an example of a food and drink brand specifically where the story hasn't linked up with the strategy, or the story has veered off piste from the strategy, and the customer's been left thinking, "What the hell?"
Okay, so I care a lot about chocolate. Some of the poorest people in the world make it. There's a lot of slave labor. Don't buy cheap chocolate. Nestle's and Hershey and Cadbury are consistent. They're saying for people who don't care about child labor and people working in poverty, we have cheap chocolate for you. It might be good. It might remind you of being a kid. But if you're going to buy Tony Chocolonely or Askinosie or Original Beans, their story is a different story. Their story is consistent. Well, one of the early bean to bar makers is a company in New York called Mast Brothers. And Mast Brothers were two guys with huge beards in Brooklyn, all bespokey feeling, etc. And then it turned out that some of their chocolate, they weren't making the way they said they were making it. And there was all this controversy about what were they melting down in the back and blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, the truth undermined the story that they had been telling. And their trajectory completely was transformed because they lost the thread. Hershey's bought John Scharfenberger's company, Scharfenberger. Scharfenberger was one of the first bean to bar makers in the US. Well, once Hershey owned them, they had a problem, which is, what are you? Are you a craft business or are you a giant corporation? And now the Scharfenberger products that Hershey is selling are way crappier and middle market, more sugar, more crunch, because that's what Hershey's good at. So again, they have a muddled story that makes it hard for them to charge a premium because it's inconsistent.
So when I think the symbiotic relationship between story and strategy, do you say there's someone listening to this who's got a food brand? You said strategy is picking your consumer and saying, or customer and saying, we're not for these people, we're for this person. How does the story then blossom out of that moment?
Well, if I'm at the Union Square Farmers Market in New York City, and the farmer is standing right over there, they're living their story, the color of the tarp on their thing, whether they have free samples, how much they charge, what they wrap things in. So there's a company, ironically, called Windfall Farms. And their story is, when you're ready to pay $60 a pound for lettuce, that's what we have. And the lettuce is all, hand-picked, et cetera. And it comes in an expensive Ziploc bag. So there's this consistent story here, right? For people who think lettuce at any price is a bargain, we got the coolest, weirdest lettuce. And it's not, you won't find any dirt here. And two booths away is the ornery, formerly organic farmer who says the organic standards in the US aren't high enough, so he has new standards. And there's dirt crusted all over everything, and you're seeing vegetables you never heard of. The price is lower, the story's different, and they're right next to each other, right? So different stories for different people.
You talk about times, game, empathy, and systems as part of strategy. And I'd love to use Nespresso, the coffee capsules. I'm like a machine gun espresso. I've had loads of them today. But I'd love to, kind of first define time, games, empathy, and systems. And then how did Nespresso kind of come in obliquely and disrupt, maybe the coffee market or the at-home coffee consumption occasion?
Right. Okay. So what's a system?
Yeah.
The solar system is the most famous system, partly because of the whole Pluto controversy, but everyone knows what the solar system is. And the Earth doesn't rotate the sun because it wants to. It rotates the sun because of gravity, an invisible force that keeps it in place. The system of higher education in the UK is buried deep into class and status and your career. If you don't go to a fancy place with a fancy tie, you're unlikely to end up in the House of Lords or whatever it is, right? So there's all these things that are baked deep into our world. And just to give you an example, there is a giant power plant in the UK, I can't remember the name of it, that's 2 lakes filled with water. And they had to build it because so many people were turning on their kettle to make tea at 8 p.m. because of the BBC, that the entire power grid of the UK was put under stress, because UK has more amps than the typical homes in North America. And it just put this big drain on the system. So they had to build an entire power plant to support the tea that was being made because people were watching television at the same time. That's a system, right?
Yep.
Okay. So what we need to think about is coffee. Coffee is a complicated system that starts with poor farmers growing beans in mostly the Southern Hemisphere, and then they're processed and then they're shipped and blah, 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 blah. And very few people were extracting, no pun intended, significant profits, because most of coffee is a commodity. If you don't like these beans, we got these beans, they're all the same, just buy the cheap beans. Nespresso said, if we put them in these capsules, and those capsules only work in our machine, if we can sell a machine at a loss, once someone has that machine, they're going to keep buying our capsules day after day after day after day. So Nespresso didn't start minting money for years, but that investment at the beginning in building an installed base, a network effect, so that once someone starts serving you Nespresso, they want validation. So they tell you what they're making and you think it's good. So you go get one, et cetera, and it spirals and spirals and spirals. That's a systems strategy choice that has very little to do with coffee.
And that, I suppose, the system is the selling of the machine and making it impossible to that, because you talk a lot about elegant systems and how businesses or brands can either work with the flow or the system or kind of push against it. So that's Nespresso kind of, as you say, linking into that system and making it hard to replicate with the IP. Where does the empathy, games, and time come into the Nespresso genius?
Okay, so Nespresso had to make a choice, right? And that choice is, are they going to be able to get enough money to be able to get as many of the things that they need to get to build the system? Well, they happen to be owned by a little company called Nestle. And so Nestle has unlimited money to invest in building this edifice. That is a really different challenge than a little company would have. So they took on a huge obligation in order to build this thing, but they knew there were very few other companies that would spend that money. So there was a matchup between what they needed to build the system and what the rewards would be later, right? You can't do that. If you're a startup of 6 people, you're not going to be able to build a new kind of web browser that requires a totally different way of using the internet, because you don't have enough money to pull that off.
And then the games and time, not necessarily. Let's use games and time to explore how a kind of an upstart coffee company. I think you've got Blank Street Coffee in New York.
Yes.
Like that's swooning over to our little sardonic shores as we speak. But let's talk about Blank Street as kind of a more rambunctious challenger to that thread.
Okay, so what are games? Games have nothing to do with Monopoly or Scrabble or Whist or cribbage. Games are any situation where there's a limited number of resources, a limited number of players, rules, and outcomes. So I'm going to make some moves. You're going to make some moves. It's worthwhile to call them games because we understand game theory and because you don't have to take it so seriously when you're thinking about your moves. It's not you, it's the move. If the move didn't work, it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you didn't make the right move. Okay. So here's Starbucks. There is the game of how am I going to get $6 from someone this morning who's in a pre-caffeinated condition to help them become caffeinated when Starbucks has this huge market share. Well, one way to play the game is to have an independent cafe that has loyal following. And throughout New York, we see these cafes. They're doing fine. The reason they're doing fine is because Starbucks has established a high price point. So as long as they're near it and they don't have to pay off all the corporate overhead, they can do a fine business with one store. Blank Street looks at this and they say, well, there might be room in between those two for someone who is not Starbucks, maybe a little cheaper, but at scale. So there's lots of places you can see one, so you trust it more. But in order to pull this off, they need to play a different game. And the other game is this. In New York, there are a bunch of people with billions of dollars to invest and not enough things to invest it in. So if they could walk into that game and say, look what Starbucks is worth. We're going to raise $60 million to be able to build a low overhead, fast moving alternative to Starbucks. Put your 60 million in, you'll get 6 billion back. That's a different game. So they've got the fundraising game, which they won. They raised a fortune. And now they're trying to play the retail game, which is there's a limited number of stores, there's a limited number of locations, and Starbucks has unlimited time and money. So it's not an easy game to play. I hope they're enjoying it because I'm not sure it's going to work, but that's the game they're playing.
It's so interesting. I spoke to Rory Sutherland and he said hipsters raise the ceiling and chains raise the floor. And it's like a virtuous circle. So like the Starbucks and other chains over here, and Costa's a massive one. They set the floor and they say, right, this is our minimum standard. And then the hipster places like your Blank Street, and there's loads in London, these little 10, 15 shop chains, it raise the coffee, raise the coffee, raise the coffee. In terms of the Blank Street piece, in terms of the strategy of which customer do we say no to, essentially, how are they doing that different to Starbucks? Because I get the game as in, VC raise a bucket load of money, but in terms of the customer piece, and right. I think that's is that ultimately what strategy is? Is it's you choose your customer? Would you say that is step numero uno, or
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first two steps are what's the change we're trying to make, and who are we trying to change?
Sure.
Who's it for, and what's it for?
Sure.
Okay, so what Starbucks has found every single time Howard Schultz has tried something else, he keeps coming back to two things. One, don't make lousy coffee. Every time the coffee quality goes down, they realize they have to recalibrate and make it go back up. That doesn't mean they have to make the best coffee, but they bought not Slayer. They bought that other company that made a really expensive coffee machine. I can't remember what it was. They tried to get into instant coffee, each time trying to raise the standard of coffee. And the second thing they try to do is build the third place. Free Wi-Fi, comfortable place to sit, clean bathroom. No one's going to ask you to leave. It's like a pub, except they don't serve beer, right? Those are the two things that are at the heart of their story. Blank Street, and I'll confess, I don't drink coffee and I haven't been to a Blank Street, but I've walked past it many times. Blank Street seems to say, please come here and take your coffee and leave. They don't look like they're trying to build a warm, hospitable, large place for you to hang out with your friends for 3 hours. This place is, you're going to get an espresso. It's going to be delicious, cheaper than Starbucks. See ya tomorrow. And they can rent smaller places, have higher turnover, and compete with Starbucks without any of the costs that Starbucks has. That seems like an interesting game to play. The challenge you have is Most people think they care about coffee quality, but past a certain level, they can't tell the difference. And that means that blank has to create enough momentum that people get hooked on the process of buying coffee from them, because in a blind taste test, they probably cannot taste the difference.
Mm. And is that where the time element comes into this? Is it the literal time with the consumer? Is that where you're going with that?
No, that's not what I mean by time. Time,
okay, what do you mean by time?
Like the forest idea is this. The first month of Nespresso's P&L was terrible.
Sure.
Right? It took 5-10 years. When I was at Yahoo had the chance to buy Google for $10 million. The whole company. Because it wasn't worth anything for the first year. They had zero revenue. They were planting seeds. So what are you doing today that you will be really glad a year from now that you did? And so, if we think about peanut butter, which in my country is mostly a commodity, what would you have to invest today so that 3 years from now, it's paying off 100 times, right? And that's not an easy question to answer. If it was, the people at Nestle's would have already figured it out. But the food business tends to have moments of inspiration followed by long stretches of commodity. And I promise, if you're a small food entrepreneur and you get into the commodity mindset, you will lose.
But by commodity mindset, unpack that a little bit more.
A commodity means that you can buy this if you want this, but there's one over there that's just like it. You only make a commodity if you think you're making a commodity.
Do you think there's a commodification of strategy and storytelling in that almost a founder is looking in the same field as every other tree that's being planted and thinking, I want to be a bit like that? And that's where you're kind of trying to choose the same customer. Does that make sense? You're trying to say
a little bit. I guess what I'm getting at is this. If someone offered me cell phone service like I have now for half the price, I would switch instantly. AT&T has no brand. Verizon has no brand, et cetera, et cetera. They're all the same. Just give me the cheapest one. And anytime I have 4 hours just to waste, I could go buy a cheaper cell phone alternative, right? What I'm talking about is some customers will cross the street for a better jar of peanut butter. Most of them will not, but some will. What makes it better? That is the key question, right? Because it's probably not in a blind taste test. The Journal of Wine Economists has shown that sommeliers and other people who are fancy prefer $100 wine over $10 wine, unless it's a blind taste test, in which case they prefer $10 wine over $100 wine. So what are you buying when you buy a $100 bottle of wine? You're buying the story of a $100 bottle of wine, not what it tastes like. So the challenge you got to hear is you need to build a story that people who want a story will pay for.
Totally. I wanted the other part that really struck me was, can you see the river? And it's that kind of that flow, and I suppose that links to working with the system, or as you say, kind of digging a little bit on the left hand side, which you could maybe argue is what Nespresso did. But I'd love to know, in terms of this flow, I love the Bruce Lee quote, "Be like water," and I try to embody that, where you just kind of move with things. But in your illustrious career in marketing, like, I'd love to know what's been the biggest unforeseen change, like cataclysmic change. And how did you adapt like water to that?
So let's talk about what I mean by the current. I can see out my window the Hudson River. The Hudson River is a tidal estuary, means 12 hours it goes one direction, 12 hours it goes the other. And
how does that work?
It's a fjord. It goes with the tide.
Okay. Sure.
But when you look at it from a distance, it looks like a lake. There are no waves on it. The difference between a lake and a river is there's a current. On a lake, it doesn't matter which way you go because the water's just sitting there. But if there's a current, it's totally different to paddle your canoe upstream than downstream. So what makes someone a good surfer is they pick good waves. That's it. That's the key. Picking good waves. So in my career, I have been buffeted by my unwillingness to see waves when I should see them. The most expensive moment was when I wrote one of the first 5 books about the internet. In that moment, I had enough resources and skill. I could have built Yahoo. But instead of building a search engine, I wrote a book about the internet. And the book ended up selling, 12,000 copies or something. And Yahoo went off to be worth $80 billion. So I have this t-shirt that I sit right over there to remind me that doing what I think I'm supposed to do is not my job. My job is to see what is going to happen next. Where's the current flowing? And it's very easy to dismiss things that are happening and saying that's not real, like AI. But it's also easy to get caught up and say NFTs when they're junk, right? So it's not easy to tell where the current is flowing, but it flows. And if we can see it and dance with it, the wind is at our back, as opposed to fighting to insist to the world that we are right.
Let's talk about, in terms of seeing this wave, I can almost imagine a founder being in the water and kind of just putting their hand and feeling the wind and the zephyr kind of tell them where it's going. One thing that's massive in the States and is slowly getting over here is this sort of functional mushroom coffee, Four Sigmatic, all those brands, Nootropics. It's massive in the States. And I don't know, I'm going next year, actually, that show in LA or I don't know what it is, but huge expo. And kind of in the UK, you guys are kind of in the water 3 years ahead of us. Your waves are 3 years ahead of us, and it usually comes over here and it either works or it doesn't. Hard seltzer flew in the States, absolutely bombed here. Because to get people to drink mushroom coffee, right? This to me sounds crazy. I suppose the first question is, how are they in the waves seeing this movement come? And then what is the strategy and the story of that? Because, 20 years ago saying, right, let's drink some mushroom coffee, people think you're a bit bonkers, but it's beginning to work. Do you know what I mean?
All right. So when you're in LA, say hi to my wife. She goes every year to the food expo because her bakery now has 100 Whole Foods and 80 plus employees. I'm not talking about fads. And what I mean by current in this case, using the mushroom thing, is since 1970 something, so it's been 50 years, there has been a movement for placebos in food. Functional food that comes with a story that begins by being sold in alternative places like health food stores or farmers markets or online, and then moves through the masses and ends up at Target or Walmart or wherever. That just keeps happening over and over and over and over and over again. So what the mushroom coffee people did is just simply say, oh, people keep asking questions about what could they put in their body to make them feel better. And people are really into coffee and have been for a long time. Let's put them together. But if it's not mushroom coffee, it's going to be the next thing. But they're all related in that they are about our quest for safety and long life and control. And so doing that for $29 or $7 is a bargain.
I am absolutely over the bloody moon that Big Fish, yes, Big Fish, the big dons of Challenger Food and Drink brand design. I mean, Perry is an absolute legend. He's designed every Challenger brand in your cupboard. Charlie Bigham's, Goo, Tyrrell's, Rana, Clipper Tea. The list is endless. And Big Fish are looking to speak to the next wave of Challenger Food and Drink brands who are a force for good. They're looking to invest in brands, and we've got this sick thing coming next year that you do not want to miss out on. If you want to speak to Big Fish, if you want to go to the Fish Bowl, drop me a DM and I can make it happen. North Star, get listed, say listed, and grow. Do you actually know your shopper? If you don't know your shopper, you're literally pissing and spunking money up the wall. Knowing your shopper is the secret weapon to unlock more grocery listings and more stores. But not knowing your shopper is literally like driving in the dark, hungover, without a sat-nav, in a thunderstorm, in February with 5 miles of petrol in the tank. But knowing your shopper is like having a sat-nav. A full tank of petrol, it's a glorious sunny day, you're listening to the Sugar Babes, and you've got a fresh hot pumpkin spice latte by your side, North Star Illuminator is the shopper map to the promised land of growth and success. It does 3 wonderful things for your brand. 1, make your marketing budget sweat. When you've got lucid, crystal clarity on exactly where each precious penny is going, you know how to drive loyalty with existing customers or even bring new shoppers into your brand. Numero 2, what's actually driving performance? Do you actually know why your sales are going up and down? You need to know, like, are you bringing new shoppers into the category? Is that driving growth? Are loyal customers buying more of your brand? Are shoppers switching in and out of your brand versus other brands? I mean, Perfect Head's a glorious example. They are bringing new shoppers into sports and energy. They are so incremental versus, say, chocolate bars, where people just switch in and out of brands all the time. The more you know this, the more oomph you've got with your buyer when you go to do a marketing plan, a joint business plan with retailers. The buyers want to know how incremental you are to the category. That is your passport to success. North Star is your passport. And what you can do is you can literally see it by channel, by retailer, get so specific. If you're looking to go to the next level, honestly, get in touch with North Star and go to the promised land. MKJ Ignite are a team of experienced recruiters who specialize in the challenger brand space. They recruit for over 50 brands, ranging from pre-revenue startups right through to some award-winning brands such as Real Superfoods and Purdy and Fig. They recruit across all levels and all functions. So whether you're looking for a new salesperson, a new marketing whiz, or an ops guru, MKJ Ignite have got you covered. They're bloody good at what they do, trust me. So if you're looking to hire or you're looking for a new role, get in touch with MKJ Ignite. They won't let you down. Are you looking to turbocharge your brand, take it to another level, save money, save energy, save stress, save time? Well, I've got the perfect thing for you. I am delighted to announce that HC Brands, formerly HC Consulting, my boy Harry Clark, has just launched a commercial growth accelerator program designed specifically for challenger food and drink brands. You can upskill your commercial team. They've got so many modules. You can handpick them. We can do the full shebang. You're going to save hours of research. You're going to get the tools to turbocharge your growth, get better clarity on your brand's objectives and directions. And look, Harry's worked with some amazing brands, Holy Moly, Islands, Savile, and Rooted Drinks. He's really helped me with a strategy for Hungry. Yeah, if you're looking to turbocharge your brand, link in the show notes, and you're going to be able to do that easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I was having a conversation the other day with someone who's got a big brand over here, and we were talking about this obsession with fads and trends, and everyone's always asked the question, what's the next trend in food and drink? Is it going to be functional mushrooms, or is it protein, or is it nootropic? And I actually think if you kind of invert it, like sort of Charlie Munger inversion rule, and say, what's not going to change in 300 years? And I think the only thing that I think everyone's forgetting in food and drink is, does it taste yummy? Does it taste absolutely delicious? The trend that's going to, Heinz ketchup tasted delicious 100 years ago, whenever it came around. And it's still going today because it tasted delicious. On that theme, what are some of the principles of strategy that will never change? Say this podcast is played in 200, 300 years time. What are the things that will never change despite the waves and the winds of fad kind of blowing from the left and right?
I will answer your question in a second, but first I need to insert something about delicious and about Heinz. It's very easy as a food entrepreneur to think that there is a deliciousness shortage. There is not. I would like to encourage you to make something delicious. Thank you very much. But there is not a deliciousness shortage. That is not why people are going to buy from you. They're going to buy from you because of the 2 things that are never changing about humans: a need for status, a need for affiliation, and the third one, a bonus, freedom from the feeling of fear. Those are the 3 things that motivate people. Status means I get to eat lunch first. I'm a fancy person. I'm an insider. I've earned this. Affiliation is the people to my left and the people to my right are doing this. I don't want to be left out. And the freedom from the story of fear is I don't want to die. Those 3 things over and over and over and over and over again. And so if you decide to show up as a food entrepreneur, you better have a story bigger than this is delicious. Because I can't name a food entrepreneur who has succeeded solely because it's delicious. And the last thing about Heinz ketchup, Malcolm Gladwell has pointed out, Heinz ketchup is in more refrigerators in the United States than any other food except for Kraft Singles cheese, which isn't really cheese. And the reason no one buys any other brand is simple. When you are 3 years old, Heinz ketchup is the very first food your mother lets you dispense yourself. And so to buy any other brand of ketchup is to denigrate your mom. It is a celebration of your childhood to embrace Heinz ketchup. That is what they make money from, not the fact that it's delicious.
On that kind of, slightly tangential here, but I've been reading a book called The Ape That Understood the Universe, which is a bit of a mouthful. But in the opening chapter of that book, it details almost an alien coming down from space and kind of having a view on human nature. What would you say the role of marketing is on human nature if you were to try and explain it to an alien?
Marketing is people like us do things like this. That's all it is. It is a cultural signal to people who want affiliation and status to say, this is what we do. So if you're looking at old issues in National Geographic and you see people from somewhere else wearing weird clothes, they're only weird to you. They're not weird to them. They grew up wearing those clothes because that's what the marketing told them to wear. Maybe not the store marketing, but it's still marketing, right? So if someone from 40 years ago saw us with this conversation with you little with invisible white things in your ear and me doing this thing, wearing these clothes, but what are we doing here? All of it was invented by marketing. This is normal now. So the goal, if you want scale, is to make what you're trying to shift from new to normal. Some people want to go when it's new. Some people want to go when it's normal. But this is how we get in sync as a species. The way ants get in sync is they release pheromones and the smells tell them what to do. Well, this is our version of that.
The circle of us versus the circle of now. I read that like 5 times and I'm still a little bit baffled by that. And
it's such a big idea.
Such a big idea. Could you unpack that, like the circle of us versus circle of now? And then, any food and drink, big, small, beautiful, ugly brand to kind of add some color to that.
So what's the circle of now? Everyone has one. If you are 2 years old, your circle of now is 7 seconds. Whatever you want it right now. If you are Charlie Munger, your circle of now is 15 years. That you are willing to do something today if it's going to pay off in the next 15 years. So if you want to be a good investor, you better make your circle of now bigger. If you want to act like an infant, you better have a tantrum when things aren't exactly the way you want them to be. So human beings, customers, have a circle of now. How big is it, right? If you're selling cold drinks at a football match, the people who are your customers have a circle of now of less than 60 seconds. If you can't get them what they want in less than a minute, they don't want it.
Sure.
So that's number one. And then the circle of us. The circle of us for a 2-year-old is mommy, daddy, and me. That's it. And I don't care about what's happening over there in Albania. Mommy, daddy, me. That's a very small circle of us. On the other hand, Tony, who started Tony's Chocolonely, sells 25% of all the chocolate in the Netherlands because he cares about people in Tanzania and Ghana and the Ivory Coast. His circle of us is much bigger. His customers' circle of us is getting bigger because he is leading them to think wider. So it's longer and wider. These are habits and situations that we have. Some companies, like banks, will push you very hard to make your circle of now very short, right? We'll give you money today. Don't worry, you'll have to pay us back in the future. It doesn't matter. And to make their circle of us very small, right? Saying you need the money, you deserve it. And spiritual leaders say, no. You need a bigger circle of us and a longer circle of now. So we got to decide what story are we telling and who are we telling it to?
How does this link to strategy? The circle of us versus circle of now. Are they semiotic or are they binary? Like how do they link together?
So what's Nespresso doing? Nespresso says It's 7 a.m. You want a good cup of coffee. You don't want a good cup of coffee by driving to Blank Street Coffee and waiting. You want a good cup of coffee right now. So circle of now is short. Nespresso is saying, of course, billions of our pods are in landfills around the world. Not your problem. Your grandchildren will worry about that. That's it, outside of your circle of now, outside of your circle of us. Nespresso would not work if people were not focused on convenience and selfish.
Have you a couple more questions? Is that okay?
Yeah.
The elegant path is the most useful path forward, and I loved the analogy of talk of your friend running. Like, I'm a bit out of shape at the minute, Seth. Probably been eating a few too many cheeseburgers, but I used to know that feeling when you get into running and it just feels light and you just feel at one with nature. And I also know the feeling of feeling like you're carrying around quite a lot in a derriere area for sure. But this simplify then add lightness. You talk about Colin Chapman at Lotus. Talk to me. We talked about strategy. How this simplify and then add lightness. Could you talk about that? Is there a brand that has been heavy, a food brand that's been heavy and been running slowly through drudgery that has then simplified and added lightness?
So what did Danny Meyer build at the Union Square Cafe and the Modern and Gramercy Tavern, right? His entire strategy can be written on a business card with room left over. Create hospitality that people want to talk about and come back for. That's it. That determines who you're going to hire, how you're going to train them, how you're going to charge, what you're going to serve, all of these things. You've picked who your customers are. That's super light, direct, clear strategy.
Wait, sorry, say that again. What did he say again? Sorry, he said...
Build an environment. People who come to Union Square Cafe to eat have food in their home. They ate a meal just before this. They're going to eat a meal after this. We are not solving a food shortage problem.
Sure.
People are going to come to this place because of affiliation and status. They're going to come to this place because the story of hospitality makes them feel better. They're going to come to this place because their guests are going to give them more status. All of these things. But it's super simple. Strategy is, for a certain kind of customer, offer remarkable hospitality that is worth talking about and coming back for more of. That's it. So if a waiter needs to make a decision, you don't have to manage that waiter. You just have to have that waiter understand your strategy. They will invent new tactics to make someone feel seen and understood and remembered. And so 5 years ago, I went to see Patricia Barber play at Danny's old jazz club. And we get there a couple minutes before the show. We're a little late. It's first come, first serve. And Danny does not know I'm going. I mean, I have a reservation, but it's a very big institution. We get to the thing and I say, sorry, you're almost started. I hope you have a table left. We have a reservation. And they say, oh, welcome. And they bring us right to the front row and they serve us a fruit plate with a note from Danny that says, welcome back. Glad you're here. That happened without Danny even knowing about it.
So is that the strategy comes from the top down, but some of the genius comes from the bottom up?
Tactics, yes.
Tactics, yeah. Because I think the Starbucks the name on the coffee was a bottom up innovation. I think I read that somewhere. It wasn't a I listened to a podcast with Howard Schultz. It was genius. And it's like those, as I say, it's almost that blossoming on the tree. It's those little bit moments of magic. If you get the strategy right at the beginning, then it can blossom. So would you say, Seth, that strategy, the best strategy, the most elegant and light strategy is when you can just boil it down to one sentence on a napkin a la Danny Meyer?
I'm very nervous about saying that because you will then have all these committee meetings where you try to boil it down and average it out and make it fit. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, please make some very hard decisions about who your customers are. What do they dream of? What do they miss? What are they afraid of? That customer, what is the story that will heal them? What is the story that will elevate them? Live that story. Now the strategy will take care of itself.
Why is it so hard to do that?
Because you have to say no to all the people who want Brussels sprouts without bacon.
Final couple of things. So, and this is not meant to be a crass question. It may sound crass. It's really not. And I asked this to Rory Sutherland, and I was reading this book by Matt Ridley, The Rational Optimist, and it kind of links to this human nature. And he says that progress is when two ideas are having sex with each other. And by this, so for example, you could say Starbucks put, the two ideas with the third space and coffee, and then you have this, that is progress. Uber is taxis and technology. I believe that Whoop, the wristband, is kind of having sex with alcohol-free beer. Like the more beer, the less booze you drink, the more you look at your Whoop, the more you check the Whoop, the less you want to drink. It's kind of this circular effect. What do you think are two ideas that you would like to have sex with each other to drive progress?
The first book I read from Matt Ridley, almost no one has read. He wrote it a very long time ago, called The Red Queen Theory. I strongly recommend it.
Red Queen Theory.
And my mission is to help people make their circle of us bigger and their circle of now longer. And I believe that as boomers like me die off and a new generation shows up, that is not only an amazing strategy available to people, but it's morally imperative.
Morally imperative.
Don't sell cigarettes.
Don't sell cigarettes. Two more things. Richard Feynman says the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. How do you fool yourself?
Or I fool myself all the time. I fool myself by believing that I'm right. I fool myself by believing I'm working hard. I fool myself by inventing circles of confidence when I'm just a tiny drop in a very big ocean. I fool myself into believing I'm as kind as I could be. I fool myself into believing that I'm contributing. I can do better in all of those things. I try.
Daniel Kahneman, have I said that right?
You did.
The premise of this book is that it's easier to recognize other people's mistakes than our own. Like, what's mistakes you recognize in other people, but you probably do yourself?
Danny's a pretty profound guy. It's easy to imagine that we are embracing each precious day, not wasting it. But in the scheme of things, we're probably wasting it more than we should.
Yeah, I read somewhere yesterday. There's Japanese have loads of different words for different things. Like Japanese have words that there's a moment.
So do we.
Yeah, but no, sorry, as in words that aren't in the English language. But there's a Japanese word. I think there's a Japanese word for nature bathing, which basically means you walk through nature. There's another word which is basically this moment. So this commute into London, into the city, is actually different than every other moment, but we just fail to recognize that preciousness of it. And I think that's a really good framing thing. Final question, Seth, because I've loved this, and this is more just for my insatiable curiosity, but I really believe in this thing called bench press books. And what I mean by that is, so sometimes there's a book that you'll read and it's right book, wrong time. And, for example, I read Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile when I was 20. Like, what was the point? Like, I may as well have read Colin the Caterpillar or that Caterpillar book. It was just pointless. But I read it a couple of years ago. I was like, oh my God. And then actually sometimes a book is like a fine wine because the book's the same, but you're actually a completely different person. You read a book at 20 versus 30 versus 40, same book, completely different. I would love to know what are some of those bench press books, some of those books that were really hard to kind of get your head round, but the more you read them, the more they just kind of go into your soul and really nourish you.
The Gift by Lewis Hyde.
The
Gift. Just Kids by Patti Smith. And The War of Art by my friend Steve Pressfield. Yeah. I would add to that The Art of Possibility, a book I reread every year.
Art of Possibility. Amazing. Seth, thank you so much. Appreciate you being super generous with your time. The book's out. We'll get this to go live the day the book goes live, I think. Beautiful. October. I've loved that. As I said, there's some more peanut butter and some other goodies coming your way.
You're very kind.
And we'll catch up soon.